Welcome, everyone, to February's CRC Roundtable, a monthly virtual webinar series where we host targeted, inclusive, and informed conversations that match scientific advances and management needs. These webinars are designed for contribution, not consumption. So each seminar invites a diverse range of researchers, managers, and other professionals to have conversations around critical topics. The point of this is to build connectivity between all of us, provide a place to ask clumsy questions, and increase our collective understanding for decision making. As a reflection of that intent, the panelists today have been given about 25 minutes total to provide introductory remarks, allowing a full 30 minutes for discussion. These webinars are recorded, and past webinars are available on the CRC website and the Roundtable's YouTube channel. So I encourage you to review those if you've missed some of our past discussions. As you arrive, please type your name, organization, and location into the chat box so we can all see today's webinar community. And we also ask that you stay muted with your camera off while our presenters are speaking. We like to start each webinar by asking why this topic, why now, and why these speakers. In the Chesapeake Bay watershed, food forests offer an innovative approach to restoration that integrates ecological function with community benefit. Designed as multi-layered perennial planting systems that mimic natural forests, food forests can reduce nutrients and sediment runoff, improve soil health, increase tree canopy, and enhance biodiversity, while also producing fruits, nuts, and other edible crops. While formal use in modern restoration programs is a relatively recent practice, indigenous communities have integrated trees and edible perennials into agricultural landscapes for thousands of years. When strategically located along riparian corridors on marginal agricultural land and in urban neighborhoods, food forests can function as living green infrastructure that supports our watershed restoration goals while simultaneously expanding food access, climate resilience, and local stewardship. I have the pleasure of introducing you to our two speakers today. Shelley Barrick Parsons is the Executive Director of Capital Trees, which is in Richmond, Virginia, and Frances Smith is a Natural Resources Planner with the Maryland Forest Service. Both Shelley and Frances implement food forest programs, and we're thrilled to learn from their experience working in this space today. So speakers, I will gracefully let you know if we bump up against the time by turning on my camera. And attendees, please feel free to drop your questions into the chat as we go along. If we don't get to your questions during the webinar, we will give the speakers the opportunity to address them afterwards, and we'll share that information along with any resources mentioned during today's chat back to the community through our follow-up email. And with that, I will turn it over to our first speaker, Shelley.
Good afternoon, and thank you for welcoming me to do this presentation on behalf of Capital Trees. We are an urban greening organization located in Richmond, Virginia, and primarily focus on building public green spaces and increasing tree canopies around matters of increasing biodiversity, including green infrastructure, and looking at how our projects connect both people to one another and nature. We have completed several large projects throughout Richmond, including the one, if anybody's been here, along the Virginia Capitol Trail called the Lowline Green. And then a major part of our work is that not only do we build public green spaces and increase tree canopy, we sort of backed our way into sustainable management of those spaces for the long term alongside our communities. And so I'm going to share a little bit with you about a new project that we completed in the fall of 2025, although some of the planting was done in the fall of 2024. And it's at the Hotchkiss Green, located on Richmond's north side, which I'll show you a map of in a second. But I think it's helpful to know how we got into doing food forests when we've been primarily doing cultivated landscapes, looking at green infrastructure. And it's because we have these project priorities that our projects will be focused and grounded in the community and receptive to their feedback. They will be projects that do seek to build climate resilient communities and mitigate climate impacts, particularly heat island and stormwater and the lack of biodiversity. We also try, and this is an always moving target, to design for the future. So we're trying to build and design projects with our partners that are manageable. And so that those go together with our efficiency and cost effectiveness. So we're looking at the long-term management and sustainability of the project. Does the capacity of both Capital Trees, our community partners, does that match the design maintenance needs? Might be one way to say that. And that I think is going to be important to discuss as we look at food forests. So this is where, here's a map of where we are. This is in the northern area of Richmond, Virginia, and the project was part of the Hotchkiss Field Community Center, both interior renovations and renovations to the exterior landscape. I just shared this picture because this is an urban heat map. This park, Hotchkiss Field Community Center, was identified as one of the top 5 hottest parks in Richmond. And I think it helps you understand a little bit about the site conditions. The places that are not red and yellow and orange are the places along the Cannon Creek Greenway where there is very adequate tree canopy. These other places less than. Whoops, sorry about that. Oh no, hold on one second, sorry. I have the map link in there, sorry about that. So this is again the site. This is a zoomed in of that. You can see our original project area. It was just under 2 acres here at the back of the Hotchkiss Field and Community Center. The conditions were like this. It was primarily a monoculture of turf grass, more specifically, predominantly wiregrass. We did learn from Jeremy Hoffman this summer, if you don't know this, that when areas like this dry out, they really behave like cement when it comes to the heat island impact. But I'll also tell you, like, this is a maintenance challenge, even when you go in to develop landscapes. Back to our community engagement, we did community engagement both virtually and in person throughout the project development, including bringing back specific designs to the community for their feedback. And that's really how we ended up developing a food forest in this project, because it was one of the community's priorities, which included walkability, safety, retaining the location, and I'll show you this, of an existing community garden rather than moving it away from the building, wanting pollinator-friendly habitats to help get pollinators across that big turf field into the community garden, and then some kind of food forest or edible landscape feature, and community gathering spaces. Here is the initial kind of plan that came out of the community engagement. The orange circle is where the existing community garden is. In an original master plan that happened before we started community engagement, they had moved that community garden down into this area, but there is no water access. It's also protected a little bit by the walls of the building. In fact, we were out there a couple of years ago and they were still growing tomatoes in October. So that gives you a little sense. This teal circle here is where our food forest is located, to give you, again, kind of a sense of the size and scope of it. And then the orange circle, or the yellow oval, is where we installed a pollinator berm and habitat. So kind of showing you all the ways that these spaces interact together. I thought it might be helpful from scope to just see this again on the plans that were submitted for permitting and approval, the food forest and teal, the pollinator berm, which ended up getting a lot bigger because we needed to store some more dirt from the trail excavation, and then the community garden. Here was some of the inspiration for the plants, and I'll go over the plant list with you in a second and talk a little bit about that, but this was some of the inspiration. But I wanted to stop here and pause and say, because this was not part of Capital Tree's area of expertise, we are a member of the City Parks Alliance, and I had been to Philadelphia for their annual or biannual meeting and had become familiar with the Philadelphia Orchard Project. And I highly recommend that. It's in the links to the resources, because they have this resource right here where they take trees, shrubs, and herbaceous plants and go plant by plant, common name, size, and really this most important column here, easy question mark. This is its maintenance and input category. Easy means it is low maintenance, low chemical fertilizer input. And again, it tells you some other things like, well, you need 2 plants to make this work. But that was really important for us in working with the landscape designers on this project. We looked at this list, we looked at what was native in our area, and we selected the plant list was to be representative of low maintenance and low mess fruit bearing plants. So that's something to think about. Apples, pears, those are high input in terms of maintenance and need, and in terms of being attractive to eat, they're high input plants. So we use this as a guide for our plant selection. Again, to give you a scope of size, here is where the pollinator berm is and the future food forest, along with the community garden when the project was under development. It does have a permeable asphalt trail, so that made the pollinator berm slightly larger because we had a lot of dirt we excavated. And here's just a few pictures of the finished project. With me giving you an honest picture of the wiregrass that we are now fighting after it's done. And some of our volunteers, and this is a tree alley looking down towards the food forest. And then again, this is us installing that 1,300-ish plug pollinator berm, which I think is an important sort of bridge between the food forest and the community garden and getting pollinators to the site. So here's a couple of things. That little circle back there is showing you where the pollinator berm is. This is this fall picture of the food forest. And so I think there were questions about maintenance. We are struggling with maintenance. Again, even with clear expectations in the contract, this was turf before it was a food forest. And I think, this is a conversation for other folks too, is there's part of us that wishes we had just let this lie fallow for a year and done some non-chemical weed maintenance or weed removal type activities before we planted. But the way we structured the project didn't allow for that. But that's something we are thinking about. So I just point this out. It's a lot. There is maintenance. And this is one of the big things we're going back and doing right now to improve the soil, to fight the weeds, is we are working to add a rather thick, I think 4 to 6 inch layer of arborist chips. You can see our little persimmon back there. So this is one of the things that we are contending with right now. And here, if it's helpful to see, is our plant list. Again, drawing on that list I showed you before of plants that are low input. You'll notice something. We had pawpaws. This is a super dry place. A couple of those have already died. And so we're going back with plums that we think may be more site appropriate. We have persimmons, the jujube, figs. This is an interesting, this American hazelnut replaced with oak leaf hydrangea. That happened in the installation without our knowledge. So those actually are going to be moved because they're in high sun and not working, and hopefully we'll go back to replace the hazelnuts. But again, cherry, jossaberry, blueberry, strawberries, elderberry, which are coming from one of our other projects because they were hard to source, and then red buckeye was put in for mulberry. I will tell you, because we did meet with the landscape company, some of this was hard to source. So that was one of the challenges for us, sourcing it, trying to source what are natives or relative cultivars. All of that was a challenge at a landscape scale. So you see some of these substitutions in here, or not able to get them. So I would just share that with you. And here's a little bit about what we've learned in this first year. It's a work in progress to understand what will thrive in an urban setting. We did see persimmons, strawberries, blueberries, jujube produce fruit in the first season. So that was a really good sign. And we are really working to build the soil through an application of arborist wood chips. And just FYI, and this is back to our maintenance and our partnership, there is no irrigation on site. We have 2 hose bibs, but no in-ground irrigation. And that has to do with our partnership with parks, the cost of maintaining irrigation, the frequency at which it gets broken. So we really will be moving to models where this is sustainable with low or no water input. We do contract with a local nonprofit in the establishment phase when we desperately need water, along with using the tree diapers. And then again, here's a list of resources. These are the Philadelphia Orchard Society resources. I've also added in, this is a list of fruit-bearing plants, Appalachian, capital trees, along with the Virginia native plant guides. There's other places that you can source Virginia native plants from. These were all some of the places we used to guide our selection to do both fruit bearing edible landscape and native as much as possible. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Shelley. Francis, we'll turn it over to you.
Okie doke. Let me bounce over here, share screen. Okay, hopefully everybody sees that. Okay, so my name is Francis Smith. I work for the Maryland Department of Natural Resources, specifically the Maryland Forest Service. Those are just some of the job duties that I handle there. My main focus is agroforestry. Have a handful of practices that are under agroforestry, but today we're specifically looking at community food forests. So what I was going to do is basically highlight, sort of do a case study of a demonstration site I have. Um, whoops. The site I'm going to talk about is called the Edible Trail at White Marsh Park. It is over in Queen Anne's County on the Eastern Shore. I was funded by Chesapeake Bay Trust Grant, so we installed it. Were awarded the grant in 2020. Um, and that was sort of a own challenge in itself because that was right when COVID hit and we went into lockdown. I'll touch all that on the challenges slide a little bit later on. I just wanted to give you the basics here. It's about an acre and a half. We got deer fencing from Deer Busters, just because of a public facing site and the deer pressure is pretty intense. So we wanted to be able to preserve everything without a lot of tree tubes and caging and things and just make it more of a pick your own trail setup. Those are the species there that you see. All native, majority bare root seedlings. I did mix in a couple containers of each species for what I refer to as pollinator insurance, just to make sure we also have a bit of genetic diversity. So I do have a couple containers sort of at the end of each of those species sections. And also not knowing with a persimmon, you need to have male and female. So I wanted to be sure that I actually could account for that in the persimmon section. The big secret is it's not really a trail. I would say it's more of a, in my mind, it's just a native tree and shrub orchard. It does sort of serve the purpose of a food forest and a trail because you would be kind of walking through the species sections and the species are grouped together. The CBT grant was just short of $10,000 that funded it, but the big BUT there is really because the Maryland Forest Service installed the fencing. If my forestry folks did not install the fence, it would be 21,000 total cost. Okay, and I just wanted to sort of highlight some of the partners. Queen Anne's County Parks and Rec, it is their land that we installed the project on. Chesapeake Bay Trust was the grant source. The scout troops have been amazing from the beginning, from building compost bins for me to weeding to sort of being community advocates for me. They went in there and watered during a really bad drought period, but I've also had local universities there, mainly for tours and some weed warrior days. And the local high school, their honor society has been there nearly every year from really 2021 on. This, when you first show up at the park, we have this sign here under a kiosk, and it sort of just shows you the general layout. And there's also a harvest calendar to sort of give people tips on what year approximately and what month approximately you would go in there and harvest the species. And there are elderberry, serviceberry, and beach plum would have been three other species that I would have liked to have on site. This is a just example of my interpretive signage that we have in there. So we have a sign in front of each species section. There's a nice QR code there that you can go to our website and get a bit more information as far as species specs and like pollination and pruning and even how to propagate these things. We're having a neat event in about probably a month where we'll be dividing a lot of the suckers from my black chokeberry there for people to pot up and take home essentially for their own. I wanted to show the early years here. So this is when the site was installed. We had the whole field mulched, which I'll also cover that on the challenges slide a little bit later. It was during COVID, so you see our mass tours way back in the day. I used tree tubes in there, not every single tree, but I did have tree tubes despite the fencing as just another educational talking point to explain to people how these tree shelters work because this fencing is not something that people can just go and get on their own. And it's really not something we do very often within forestry, within our tree planting practices. We're usually working with the tree tubes and the cages. And fast forward to surprise, the mulch was not screened for weed seed, um, as we actually were led to believe during the planning of this project. So part of the low maintenance plan with this project was that that mulch was screened for weed seed and we wouldn't need to really have mowing. And obviously that has changed since the time the project was installed. Believe it or not, even within that hot mess of green stuff, there were a lot of really good beneficial pollinators, a lot of goldenrod and aster, as well as hemp dogbane, and predominantly native cover. The one end did have thistle, but a lot of it was actually native. And you see that in the lower corner. I eventually got staff at Centerville that were helping me because that office of ours was vacant for a bit. So we had someone coming in and mowing between the sections, which you see with that little group tour there. That's University of Maryland Eastern Shore that is visiting there. So as you saw, it got a bit messy. And when you're working with Parks and Rec, that was a definite challenge. It just looked like unmanaged landscape to them. But as you'll see later on, everything really survived amazingly well, other than really my blueberry section struggled a bit. And again, I'll cover that in a slide here shortly. So just the early spring at this site is pretty amazing just because of the migratory birds and just watching them come in and pick off the bugs. All the pollinators that are in there. You see the bird nest there in the plum tree. American plum is pretty neat as far as the really early white flowers that show up, and they're just beautiful. That's sort of one of the first food sources for pollinators in the growing season. So not just a food forest for people, but even one that is not maintained and to the like proper perspective of some folks that there's other benefits there. And a messy food forest is actually just amazing wildlife habitat. Say if there was no fence around this, you would also have the potential of game birds with a species like hazelnut in the mix there. So just some of the challenges, the staffing. Well, number one, we got the funding in 2020 and then the pandemic hit. So we were on lockdown. The site was basically, we had to cancel all the events. And the site was essentially abandoned or just really me going over there for like the first year and a half, 2 years. Then I was diagnosed with cancer. So a whole year of chemotherapy and fighting cancer and a vacant office over there because there were no staff at that time. That site essentially was again on its own. You saw the malt surprise there where it was not screened for weed seed as we thought. We did have one patch in the fence where extra hungry rabbit got in and kind of lived very large in there for probably a solid winter. He knocked back my hazelnut some, but it essentially just served as pruning and the hazels kept coming up. And then just the drought again, similar to Shelley's site. It's not like we have set irrigation, not a lot of inputs. I mean, that's the whole point of a native food forest essentially is lower maintenance, no real like chemical inputs that say a fruit tree orchard would have, and just hardy species. But we had some pretty intense drought periods last year, early spring. It was actually really nice just because the insane amount of precip we got at that site. But it is typically goes flash drought, flash flood. My scouts were the ones that went in there with water bladders and watered my plants. And I've had a pumper truck from the fire service has gone in and watered it down like once or twice, but very minimal inputs overall with this site. And I really am in the education demonstration phase of this science of agroforestry broadly and the community food forests, even down to just each individual species and how to manage each one. And then there's natives and non-natives. That would be a whole other webinar that CRC could do just on that, really. There are a lot of questions I saw, so I don't want to ramble on too long. I just wanted to show you that despite all these challenges, that's what my happy babies look like now. Planted in 2020. Obviously, that's outside the fence, but it's that site means a lot to me because of a lot of personal battles I went through, not just even me with my health battle, family members and going through the pandemic. And my project partner won this. She eventually found another job. Our regional manager passed away. So again, there was really no one in the Centerville area. And even me coming out of chemo, like crawling around in this place, pulling weeds and going over there with my personal weed whacker. Oh, I went out of that. I'm sorry. But and those are just showing off more of my babies. Some of the tree sections, that's persimmon and American plum. And that little picture is the same place as those trees where the sign is right next to it. Just to show you that in 5 years, those were what bare root seedlings grew to. Which again, that's a whole other thing is convincing people that bare root seedlings actually grow into saplings and a forest. But yeah, so I just thank you for having me. But I did at least want to show after the challenges that we just kept pushing through, and a lot of it was really community volunteers and our office getting staff, to be honest. And now apparently County Parks and Rec is going in there and mowing for some, which did not happen for the first 4+ years, I would say.
Well, thank you so much, Francis. You are a true warrior and have built such a lovely, lovely space. And you're right, we got a ton of questions. But folks, if you're joining us live here, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat as we go along. But one of the ones that came in online was kind of like a very basic question of at what scale is something considered a food forest? Could it be just a cluster of trees in a city park, or does it need to be something more substantial for it to fit that sort of working definition?
I mean, it's really form it to fit your landscape space. Like the what I like to say when I talk about these things are it's large production in small spaces. So like my site, especially if I would have known all the stuff that was going to happen, I probably would have been happy with like a half acre, and that would have been enough to manage. Because I typically am working with understory species. Persimmon is the biggest tree. A lot of the times projects are going to be maybe more shrub heavy, and so yeah, it's that's the neat thing is it's so flexible to the space that. And I didn't even talk about herbaceous plants. I mean, I work for the Forest Service, so we're trees and shrubs, but there's that whole other layer that you can really shape it to the room that you have.
Thanks, Francis. Shelley, any additional thoughts on that question?
Well, I think you can see the scope of our project is just under 2 acres. So yeah, I saw that question. I looked up what's the definition of a food forest. I think because we primarily work in urban environments, I would say there's not a bottom threshold to the size they can be. I think it's more about what Francis mentioned, do you have the under, mid, and upper story kind of structure that goes with that. And when I was looking through our plant list, we do well at the trees and shrubs part of the forest. We probably, aside from the strawberries, need to look longer term at the lower level in our own development once we get the weeds under control.
Great. A question just came in about ways that you can amend the soil. We heard about the mulch and some of the challenges that can come with the mulch if what you think you're getting is not what you're getting. Would you do anything differently, or are there other ways to help amend that soil so that your plants have a nice place to thrive?
Yeah, this is where I wish Mary Petrus, our horticulture manager, was here, because we have been working with Bartlett Tree Service at multiple sites for varying things. And we do have them doing some soil amendments at the Hotchkiss site, both on the food forest trees and the trees in general. So I'm trying to find the invoice to tell you exactly what they did. But we are doing some soil amending in addition to the arborist chips. And I just want to clarify, arborist chips, if you're not familiar, are a little different than mulch. So it's the entirety of the tree chipped up, and usually a little larger type, in a little larger size, so that you get a more full. The argument is it's more nutritious for the tree. It breaks down slower, and it helps to build that fungal system within the soil. So we are doing some things, and like I said, we chose in this project development to do infrastructure and landscape together under one contract. My horticulture manager, Mary Petrus, and I have talked about that we might change that in the next project, that we might do the infrastructure work like the berms, the permeable asphalt trail, which was obviously a ton of infrastructure, do that, and then look at some soil amending practices, solarize. Well, that's not amending, that's but solarizing, doing a year's worth of let's fight the weeds, let's improve the soil, and then let's plant. It's just that's hard to do in a public landscape in an urban environment, because it's not done and it looks unfinished, all the things we talked about. So those are what we're doing. Let me see throughout this if I can find the invoice to tell you what exactly we've put in there. I know we've done some biochar injections, and when we plant, we use biochar, but I think there's been.
Yeah, I would just ditto to everything Shelley said. Like, it would be so nice if we had a flexible timeline to get the soil right for like a whole season. I mean, good Lord, if I was a farmer, I would probably be so anal retentive. I'd probably do like 2 years of like, and then putting compost to be able to like top dress a lot of compost. Um, we do at that site, we did plant comfrey as like our attempt at green mulch, just a ground cover that just sort of run and outcompete more of the bad stuff. And comfrey is, I refer to that as sort of like clover on steroids. It's a bioaccumulator as far as providing nutrients and feeding the trees and shrubs. And it's not just nitrogen fixing, it's more nutrients, more plant food. And you can use it as like a chop and drop mulch. So we do have that at the site, and it is certainly spread. I put it around the pawpaw mainly, but the idea also is for it to run. But it all starts with the soil, and unfortunately, a lot of our projects are like grant timeline, and you have other partners you have to keep happy. And some of that soil science, people are just the timeline, it doesn't fit what's in between our ears as far as how people want to see things like, and we're greedy and impatient and selfish as a species. We just want things like instantly. But I think having that time to get it right, or like seeding it, even like seeding in like a crimson clover or something, you need to get a foothold against the weeds. And the chips and biochar would be the ideal, particularly for us in forestry. That's the topic that gets all of us forestry folks excited. But chip drop, I mean, that's a great program as long as you know, if you know the tree company person well, that you're not getting like walnut or something that maybe impede your blueberries or things like that. But yeah, that's those sort of mixed bag approach. But really, if you had some lead time to get your soil right before you went to plant, and obviously, if we could have actually had our mulch officially screened for weed seed, I because then otherwise we would have built in probably more funding in the grant for mowing maintenance. It would have been not something that just popped up and we had to scramble to adjust to.
Great, thanks for that input. We got a lot of questions ahead of time, and I'm seeing a couple pop up in the chat about plant selection. And while I don't expect either of you to be able to speak to every, plant choice for particular zones, are there certain things that you would recommend if folks are trying to get something like this started that they need to be really mindful of in terms of plant selection, or things that you learned along the way that if you had a do-over, you would choose this type of plant versus another? So just give you each a little bit of time to talk about like your plant selection process and priorities.
Well, we really prioritized it not being messy. I mean, and I don't mean messy like the landscape. I mean fruit dropping on the trail and attracting yellow jackets. And there are certain plants that, if not harvested, have a greater likelihood of doing that. They also happen to be, in what we discovered, also the more high input plants. So those are your apples, your pears, and things like that. So that was a priority for us. I don't want to say things that could lie fallow and not be harvested and not cause a problem, but that kind of was what we were looking for in an urban environment. If the people didn't pick them, was okay if they fell on the ground. We did want things that were lower, like I said, chemical, herbicide, and pesticide input, or even fungicide. Again, because it's a public landscape, we're not using that. And if you're inviting people to pick the plants, so those were the for us. And like I said, we relied on that list from Philly Orchards and other native plant guides to do our best, but we're really, in some ways, I don't want to say hamstrung, but we're really challenged by what is available in the open market at times. And like I said, I can share those resource lists with you. There's like a Appalachian, what's the word? I'm pulling it up. Virginia Cooperative Extension has a native fruit and nut trees and shrubs of the Virginia mountains and Piedmont. So that gives you a sense. And the final thing I'd say is there were pawpaws, and it's a really dry place, and they're not in a mid-story. So that was just, there's things that more than one person read the plan, and it wasn't until it was in the ground that we were like, that's not a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah, the same thing. We had the battles with the pawpaw as far as just the exposure, and it's quite windy at this site. So I also learned that blueberries and wind aren't exactly friends. The species selection, I'm kind of in dealing with this now where so, I work for the State Department of Natural Resources. We're obviously native species, that's our thing. Um, but I also have like my agroforestry network, and there are non-natives that within a food forest, like someone may want to plant a fig tree. I have a farmer that wants to explore like pecan trees, not on like a massive scale, but a number of them just to sort of explore an orchard setting. Um, for the species, number one, it's really the things that Shelley pointed out, like the low input. You don't want any kind of chemical footprint associated with any of these, especially, I mean, come on, it's a food forest. You don't, I don't know if anybody saw the news story in Florida about like glyphosate in their bread. You wouldn't want to have a chemical footprint in a food forest like that. Um, the species and low wildlife pressure. So if there are species you find that you don't have to compete against the birds as much and you actually get some harvesting for yourself, like that's something to consider. When you play with blueberries, or have a farmer that's planting thornless berry canes. The birds are going to definitely be competition. We always have to deal with deer, but so just that wildlife pressure, any species that fruit stays on the stem long, your persimmon, your aronia, and also what are you going to do with it? Like a lot of these things, it's easy to say things are edible. Does it taste good? So my challenge is a lot of these things, you need to know the little tricks about when they do taste good off the stem, but a lot of them, you're talking it's a jelly, jam, preservative, baking, there's prep. Um, so that's also what time do you have to put into harvesting and playing with it in the kitchen? And then also obviously what time do you have to maintain whatever kind of site you're putting in? The again, something Shelley mentioned that I would second as well as the like pawpaw and say like I don't have elderberry at this site, but you really want to look at stratification and using the shade provided by the canopy of one species to allow you to grow another species near it. So a pawpaw under a locust tree leaf, that filtered sun. Walnut and pawpaw, I will, I find a forest, walnut, pawpaw, persimmon, spice bush, those are all their own sort of naturally occurring guild, but sort of using species to complement one another. Um, I would like if this was my own space, there would have been a ton more things in there. I can tell you that, and just more of that stratification that we lose sight of. And I was hired as a technician, just working on riparian forest buffers, just working on trees and tree tubes. And during my days as a tech, the lack of stratification and layering that we do in restoration work is eventually what led me to agroforestry because I saw what I always talk about as Maryland's edible understory. And that at first I saw this as a way to get trick farmers into planting trees to clean up the Chesapeake Bay watershed. But then I saw all these other added layers and that we could potentially have a pretty big impact on food security and in small developed spaces, especially in Maryland where we're so overdeveloped and parcelized as it is anyway. Um, Sorry, I went way off rant there.
That's great. It's all good information. Thank you, Francis. You mentioned deer, and we did get a question about deer in the chat. Is deer exclusion fencing the only method you've used for keeping deer out of the food forests? And how much have deer affected the plant growth and fruit productions from the projects that you all have been involved in?
Yeah, it's just the fencing is the rare case. It's really those white cylinder, the tubes and shrub caging. But the deer eat everything from 6 foot down. I mean, that's what we refer to as like the browse line. It's tough. I think, but actually, one of the things that leads to the potential of these systems in that urban setting is obviously it wouldn't be like I'm on a farm surrounded by 100 acres of woods installing a system where the deer have such an easy corridor in and out. So food forests of all the agroforestry practice being in these developed areas where you're going to have the highest chances of less deer browse versus out like in a rural landscape where they have there's just not many people around. It's just forests and fields. But yeah, it's tough. There's scent repellents. There's the visual things like the one light you put in the ground that's solar powered. It's supposed to emit a sound. I did do a trial with a really god awful smelling scent repellent, but you have to reapply that. If it rains,
Mm.
that's not going to stay. And we just need more hunters. I mean, we're just out of equilibrium on many levels. But in the natural system, it's just so far out of equilibrium with the deer population and the state of our forests and lands.
Shelley, have you had any battles with deer or any things that you've employed?
Not yet. We have another problem at another project with beavers.
Great.
But no deer right now. But I say not yet because deer head towards food sources. But because this project is in a pretty populated area, and although adjacent to a trail system, right now we haven't.
So we got a couple questions about how communities interact with the food forest, and curious to see if you have found community members starting to harvest from your different project areas, and if that's happened naturally or if it's, from what you can tell, been the result of any sort of education and outreach that you've done to encourage that harvesting and foraging.
Francis, I was going to let you go first.
Okay. Yeah, it's been a bit random. So I've done a ton of tours and talks for the site, and I know that I have had people that I gave tours to, like I know, like there's a Montgomery College that's actually in Montgomery County on the other side of the Bay Bridge. They have like a food forest collective and a permaculture club. That was more of like a directed, like, hey, you guys should come, and they did. A lot of like the community that lives around there, it's just like sporadic. The people that come in that like I would see come in with their dogs or whatever would be looking in the fence, wondering what the hell I have in there. And now, like my one ranger, he said he was in there and someone drove by and just like yelled out the window that they really liked the plums last year. Someone also just said how my couple sad blueberry bushes left, which is probably like one now, pretty much. But that apparently that was like some of the best blueberries I ever had. But yeah, it's very organic. It's not that sign that as at the kiosk there. I mean, that basically tells people to go in there, but it's not as organized, really. It's pretty sporadic. I hope that gets. I'd like to see that get more organized, and I've told scout troops like adopt a section, like have your scout troop be hazelnut farmers, and not only go in there and harvest them, learn how to manage that species. Because like, God, I need help anyway. but yeah, I'd like to have it more organized. It's very just organic and just kind of happens as people come in and out.
Mhm.
So our challenge is we're just a full year since planting, and this project was done on site where the community center has been under renovation since before we started our project. So there hasn't been as many opportunities for that hands-on engagement. And I think a third issue is we need to put signs up. We did not budget sufficiently for signs. So that's definitely something we need to look at just to introduce what's there and invite people to use it. So that we still have some work to do on engaging the community. And hopefully by early spring, the center will be back open and we can work with parks and our friends on raising more awareness about that aspect of the landscape.
It is all about the signage. Like it's pretty basic, but that is like a big piece of it. Shelly, if you all can do one of the things I would have liked to have done, and like I need to get it added to the web page, but if you do a QR code, like definitely try to think of recipes, like direct. That I have a farm volunteer that I collaborate with, and she's been yelling at me that I need to write a book. I don't know that that's happening in 2026, but we are kind of working on like a recipe book. Because that's where I'm at now. I can these systems work, and as long as you know your grow zone and you get the right plants, I mean these things work. But I'm really at like the R&D phase of like I need culinary explorers out there to just sort of play with these things. I think there's more opportunity than we realize. I think people, as soon as they pick a persimmon too soon, they're done and they're not going to try, but I think we just need to work at it more, and explore more. Where like, and that's where university extension services and
Mhm.
like nonprofits, or we did a cool project with a food science class at a middle school. We were collecting plum for trees for seed, to grow more trees, but then I also had the food science club just like play around with plum and see what they did as far as like preservatives, or I think they took it to like a local bakery or something.
Mhm. There was a question in the chat earlier, and we got a similar one from our registration responses about the potential for partnering with local food banks. Have you thought about that or seen any kind of those partnerships in action?
We're we're trying. One of the pictures in my slides that was the super tall lady was she's from the Maryland Food Bank. So the Maryland Food Bank was actually signed on as a partner on the project. We haven't really gotten because these are still like like unique, unfamiliar. These are things that aren't on the grocery shelf other than unless you count like Nutella with hazelnut or something like that. But we've just started. I have a great colleague out in Frederick County. She planted a project like right behind a local community food bank. Um, that is where I will say that I do start causing some trouble in my agency where I would like some flexibility just for like a couple conventional fruit trees or something right off the stem while we use that as a like a buy-in opportunity to educate people about these other native fruits that we need to explore more. Um, but I've only started doing that on a small scale with the food banks so far. Um, but we'll see. I have another farmer who's doing a whole mix of species, and that's what he is talking about, like a food truck and working with a local bakery. And this gent probably has the resources to do it once we get everything grown out.
Yeah, I think for us at the scale that we will potentially produce at, we would be a better partner is not the right word, source for what is a mutual aid foundation or mutual aid practice in Richmond called RVA Community Fridges. There's one nearby in the community. And those are take what you can, leave what you can type organizations. If you're not familiar with them, they often include a working fridge and food dropped off by any number of persons. I think the scope at which we'll produce would be more likely to work in that situation to be able to take it up to a nearby community fridge.
Mhm. Great. A question that came in with our registrations was your thoughts on how local governments can support these types of initiatives. Is it through, grant making or economic development commissions, planning and zoning? What type of support do you find would be helpful coming from a local government to encourage these projects?
This is probably not getting at the answer the way folks would want it. We have great relationships with our civic partners. I always want to preface with that and love working with them. I think Francis kind of mentioned it. One thing is training around green space management and care. We've run into similar issues where it looked like grass, so it was mowed, and it was grass, by the way, with the blueberry bushes in it, and it was either mowed or weed whacked. So that might not get exactly at the question because we do have a good working relationship with the city of Richmond and Henrico County, and because this was part of a design and plan process, no barriers to approval, even around the food forest aspect. But for me, it's that's where support is needed is in the long haul. And we talked about this a little bit this morning at our advisory council. It's in that support for the maintenance. It's in that support for the community engagement. And it's in that building a workforce, which is all nonprofits and the civic realm that knows how to maintain in different ways. The difficulty, and we talked about this in an urban environment, is it's needs some of those cues to care so it looks like it's being taken care of. But there are other cues to care besides just mowing everything flat or putting in mulch volcanoes. And so I think that's where we really need help. And again, that's a funding issue. Everybody loves to pay for a project, but nobody wants to pay for that long-term care of it.
Yep, she nailed it. I was just going to say it's just maintenance. And well-timed, purposeful maintenance, not just running the equipment up and down and compacting soil. And so yeah, I couldn't say any better. It was really just the maintenance and the community engagement. I cover the whole state, so I miss that site so much. I like was there nonstop, and now I can't be there. I mean, it's essentially a farm, so you really and realistically you would want to be there every week. And I mean, every row there's just a lot to manage, but yeah, just proper good maintenance. Also an understanding of maybe that these things can be blended with annual crops. Um, this site to me is a gold mine because we have fencing around it, and if they somehow got a grant to run irrigation line, community residents could, grow your tomatoes and regular vegetables in between my species sections. There are pretty wide gaps to where they wouldn't be competing for sun. And so yeah, just kind of understanding of these green spaces and how they can be folded into your standard kind of parks and rec landscape, and that opportunity. And it's a nursery. Like people could go in and divide suckers and propagate off of these species.
Mhm. We have time for one more question, and I'll say I've heard you both mention maintenance. Obviously, that's a critical component of these plans, and I've heard throughout your remarks things like, mowing, weeding, water. Are there other big factors that folks should be considering in terms of long-term maintenance needs besides those three?
Pruning. Um, we we can only prune when we're standing on the ground and not using electrical equipment, not using gas powered chainsaws. So that's just the level of liability insurance we can afford as a nonprofit. But over time, and this is any kind of tree or shrub, but especially fruit bearing, is pruning to extend its life. I'd also say, as we just came out of an unexpectedly cold period, pruning to manage any kind of natural disasters that might arise, as much as you can control for that, like hurricanes or ice storms. And that I think requires some specialized skill sets after you get above your reach. And I mean, just like this.
Mhm.
Yep, same thing. Pruning that's where I'm at now with this site hitting 5 and 6 years. It's the holy crap, I haven't been pruning, and now my hazelnut and black chokeberry, we're doing some serious thinning out in addition to pruning this year. And if you do somehow end up with a fence, then that's your whole other. Currently I'm having stress gut over the deer fencing. I have three leaning posts that snapped at the base.
Mhm.
Um, and I've had major sections just blown out of fencing that I've been replacing over the last month with help from some staff. So the pruning, and if you do have your plants protected with things, maintaining that as well, that infrastructure long term.
Great. Well, Shelley and Francis, thank you so much for sharing your time and expertise with us today. This was a really great session, and thank you to all of our attendees for tuning in and asking all of your great questions. We appreciate you as always. We shared a lot of resources through the slides and in the chat. We'll be sure to capture those and include those in our follow-up email to folks. And we encourage everyone to visit us at our next roundtable webinar, which will be on March 18th. We'll be talking about leveraging AI and machine learning to advance Chesapeake Bay research and management. So we look forward to seeing all of you then, and thank you again for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.